Right now, in your house, there is water you are not thinking about. The water heater tank, most residential units hold 40 to 80 gallons. The pipes in your walls hold several gallons depending on your home's plumbing layout. The toilet cisterns, typically 1.5 gallons each, 2 toilets means 3 gallons. If you have a refrigerator with a water line, there is a small reservoir in the filter housing. Add it up, and the average American home contains somewhere between 50 and 90 gallons of water that requires no infrastructure to access. Turn off the municipal supply valve, and that water is still there. It will still pour out of a tap. It will still drain from the water heater's drain valve. It is sitting there right now, and almost nobody counts it in their preparedness math. 50 gallons sounds significant. For a family of 4, at survival-level consumption, the bare minimum a human body requires to remain functional, that is less than 6 days. And that calculation excludes hygiene entirely, excludes meaningful cooking, and handles sanitation through improvised means only. 6 days of bare minimum survival, that is your baseline. That is what you have without purchasing a single additional item or building any additional system. Now the question is, what does 30 days actually require, and what does the architecture of a solution look like at each level from minimum viable to permanent? Today we run the numbers, not ranges, not approximations, actual calculated requirements for a family of 4 over 30 days, broken down into 4 categories: drinking, cooking, hygiene, and sanitation. Then we build 3 tiers of solution, each with a cost range, a complexity score, and a clear dependency profile. This is not motivational content about being prepared. This is an engineering audit. You would not size a server farm based on a gut feeling. Do not size your water infrastructure that way either. Before we calculate, I want to establish the 3 reference points that define the target range for this audit. The first is the WHO minimum, 7.5 litres per person per day. This is the quantity below which physical health deteriorates rapidly, covering only drinking and minimal food preparation. No hygiene, no flushing, survival, not function. The second is the Sphere humanitarian standard, 15 litres per person per day. This is the benchmark used by international relief organizations operating in disaster zones. It adds basic hygiene and minimal sanitation to the survival floor. The third is normal American residential consumption, 300 to 380 litres per person per day. That number includes everything: showers, dishwashers, laundry, lawn irrigation, multiple toilet flushes, long cooking times, car washing. The gap between the survival floor and normal function is roughly a factor of 40 to 50. When a crisis hits, you do not land at the top of that range. You do not land at the WHO minimum either. You land somewhere in the middle, and where exactly depends on how well you have planned. My calculation target for today is functional survival, not comfort, not anything approaching normal, but enough to keep 4 people healthy, clean enough to avoid secondary health crises, and able to manage their own sanitation for 30 days without external support. That target sits roughly at the Sphere standard for drinking and cooking, and above it for hygiene, because unlike a refugee camp, a confined American household carries specific sanitation risks that the Sphere baseline underestimates. Drinking water. The human body requires between 2 and 3 litres of direct fluid intake per day under sedentary conditions at moderate temperature. In a survival scenario, you are not sedentary. You are carrying containers, managing anxiety, potentially doing physical work, almost certainly experiencing the elevated cortisol levels that accompany a genuine emergency. Stress and physical exertion elevate fluid requirements by 20 to 50%. 3 litres per person per day covers drinking and the water mixed directly into dry foods, reconstituted rice, oatmeal, dehydrated meals. For children, The requirement is lower by body weight, but the calculation is complicated enough that rounding children to adult equivalent is the safe approach for planning purposes. 4 people times 3 litres times 30 days equals 360 litres. That is 95 gallons, for drinking alone. Cooking water. Beyond the 3 litres per person already counted, actual cooking requires additional water. Rinsing raw vegetables if you have them, boiling pasta or grains, washing cooking utensils between uses, cleaning cutting surfaces to prevent cross-contamination. The minimum reasonable cooking water allowance for a family that is preparing anything beyond cold canned food is approximately 2 litres per person per day. At 4 people, that is 8 litres per day. Over 30 days, 240 litres, 63 gallons. Running total after drinking and cooking, 600 litres, 158 gallons. Now we get to the 2 categories that most prepper guides either undercount dramatically or skip entirely. Hygiene. Let me tell you what happens when hygiene degrades in a confined household, because the timeline is faster than most people realize. After 48 hours without adequate hand washing, particularly before food handling and after sanitation activities, the rate of gastrointestinal illness within the household increases substantially. This is not a theoretical risk. This is the documented epidemiology of every disaster scenario where sanitation and hygiene infrastructure failed simultaneously. After 5 to 7 days without basic bathing, skin infections begin to develop, particularly in skin folds, on the scalp, and under fingernails. These infections start as minor irritations and escalate in confined, unsanitary conditions. In a scenario where medical care is also compromised, which is frequently the case in the same events that disrupt water infrastructure, a skin infection that would be a one-day antibiotic prescription under normal circumstances becomes a serious medical problem. After 10 to 14 days without oral hygiene, dental conditions that were stable, a small cavity, a slightly loose filling, mild gum sensitivity, can become acutely painful and debilitating. After 3 weeks, the aggregate of these hygiene-related health degradations in a 4-person household becomes a genuine medical emergency layered on top of whatever disruption caused the water failure in the first place. You cannot afford to skip hygiene. It is not a comfort item. It is a health infrastructure item. The question is not whether to maintain hygiene, but how to do it at minimum water cost. Minimum functional hygiene for a family of 4. 2 litres per person per day for hand washing across a full day's activity, before every meal, after every sanitation activity, after handling any potentially contaminated material. 1 litre per person every 2 to 3 days for a sponge bath, which amortizes to roughly half a litre per person per day. Half a litre per person per day for oral hygiene, brushing and minimal rinsing. Half a litre per person per day as a buffer for wound cleaning, eye rinsing in dusty conditions, and miscellaneous small volume uses that accumulate significantly over 30 days. Total hygiene allocation, 3.5 litres per person per day. Round up to 4 litres to absorb daily variance. 4 people, 4 litres each. 30 days. 480 litres. 127 gallons. Some guides quote 2 litres per person per day for hygiene. Those guides are designed for short-duration emergencies where you tolerate minor health degradation as acceptable for a few days. For 30 days, 2 litres per person per day is not sufficient to prevent the health cascade I just described. 4 litres is the real number. Running total after drinking, cooking and hygiene, 1,080 litres. 285 gallons. If this is already surprising, hold on. Sanitation. This is the line item nobody wants to calculate because the math is immediately confronting. A standard residential toilet uses approximately 6 liters per flush. The average adult flushes 4 to 6 times per day. Call it 5. 4 adults, 5 flushes, 6 liters per flush, 120 liters per day. 30 days. 3,600 liters. 950 gallons. That single category is larger than all 3 previous categories combined by a factor of 3. Before you close the tab, there are options that reduce this dramatically. Bucket flushing, pouring water directly into the toilet bowl rather than filling the tank, uses 2 to 3 liters per flush instead of 6 because you control exactly how much water is needed to clear the bowl. 4 people, 5 flushes, 2.5 liters, 50 liters per day. 30 days at that rate, 1,500 liters, 396 gallons. Substantially more manageable and achievable with any bucket and a practiced technique. Composting toilet or properly managed waste disposal bags eliminate the sanitation water requirement entirely. Emergency sanitation bags, designed for disaster use, are available in bulk for roughly $20 to $30 per family per week. A composting toilet unit runs $300 to $800 installed. For a serious long-duration water plan, eliminating or dramatically reducing sanitation water consumption deserves serious consideration because it cuts total water requirement by more than half. Using the bucket flush estimate, here is the complete 30-day water audit for a family of 4 at functional survival level. Drinking, 360 liters, 95 gallons. Cooking, 240 liters, 63 gallons. Hygiene, 480 liters, 127 gallons. Sanitation, bucket flush, 1,500 liters, 396 gallons. Total, 2,580 liters, 682 gallons. Round to 700 gallons to absorb variance, container dead space, spillage, and the reality that humans are not perfectly efficient with water under stress. 700 gallons. For one family. For 1 month. The FEMA guidance is 3 gallons per person for 72 hours. For 4 people, that is 12 gallons. The ratio of the actual functional requirement to the federal recommendation is roughly 58 to 1. That gap is not a criticism of FEMA. The 72-hour guidance was designed for a specific scenario, a short-duration localized event, a hurricane, a tornado, a brief water main break, where government assistance is expected to arrive within 3 days. It was not designed for cascading infrastructure failure. It was not designed for scenarios where the disruption is regional rather than local, or where the repair timeline is measured in weeks rather than hours. Puerto Rico, 2017. Hurricane Maria destroyed the electrical grid across the island, not damaged, destroyed. Without grid power, water treatment plants could not operate. The plants that treat and pressurize municipal water require electricity for pumps, for chemical dosing systems, for monitoring and control. No electricity, no pressure, no treatment. Municipal water pressure dropped to 0 across most of the island within hours of the storm. People who had not stored water, and most people had not stored meaningful quantities, were immediately dependent on whatever water remained in their pipes and tanks. That was, at most, a few days. Restoration of reliable water service took months in most areas, and in some rural communities, it took nearly 11 months. 11 months of no reliable tap water for people who had lived entirely normal modern lives the week before the storm. The 72-hour recommendation did not apply. It never applied to this type of event. Jackson, Mississippi, 2022. A different failure mode, but the same outcome. Flooding, followed by a hard freeze, damaged water treatment and distribution infrastructure. The city issued a boil water advisory, which is already an admission that the water coming from the tap cannot be trusted without treatment, and that advisory lasted for weeks. More critically, pressure dropped so severely in some neighborhoods that no water came from the tap at all. Zero pressure, zero flow. Even boiling was not an option because there was nothing to boil. The households with stored water had a functional supply. The households without it were standing in line at water distribution points. These are not exceptional scenarios. These are representative scenarios. Water infrastructure in the United States is aging, underfunded, and highly vulnerable to the combination of weather events and cascading failures that are becoming more frequent, not less. The 72-hour window is not the plan. It is the absolute minimum before the real plan needs to be operational. Now we build the three-tier solution framework. I am structuring this identically to how I would structure a tiered IT infrastructure. Tier 1 is the local cache. Tier 2 is the application layer with processing capacity, and Tier 3 is the renewable input that removes the depletion clock entirely. Tier 1, the 72-hour layer. Target volume, 100 litres for a family of 4. This covers drinking and essential cooking at the WHO minimum rate for 72 hours. It does not cover hygiene or sanitation at meaningful levels. It buys you time to assess, time to activate Tier 2, and critically, time to avoid the decision-making degradation that begins within 24 to 48 hours of significant dehydration. Dehydration at 5% of body weight reduces cognitive performance measurably. Your ability to solve the water problem degrades as the water problem gets worse. Tier 1 prevents that feedback loop from starting. Implementation: food-grade HDPE containers in the 7-gallon or 5-gallon range. The blue color is conventional for water storage and helps distinguish water containers from fuel containers, a distinction that matters in a stress scenario when you are moving quickly in low light. Fill with tap water. Add 8 drops of unscented liquid chlorine bleach per gallon, standard household bleach at 5 to 8% sodium hypochlorite concentration. Not the splashless or scented variants, which contain additives not suitable for consumption. Label with the fill date. Rotate every 6 months. Store in a location that does not freeze and is not in direct sunlight, both of which degrade both the water and the container integrity over time. 7-gallon containers cost $8 to $12 each. 4 containers gives you 28 gallons, slightly above the 100-litre target with a comfortable margin. Total cost, $40 to $50. Setup time, 1 afternoon. Complexity rating, 1 out of 5. This is the floor. There is no budget constraint, no space constraint, no knowledge barrier that prevents any household from having this. If your current setup does not include this, the first action after this video ends should be ordering 4 blue water containers. Nothing about Tier 1 requires skill, specialized equipment, power, or ongoing attention beyond a semi-annual rotation. The failure mode for Tier 1 is entirely pre-event. The containers are sitting on a shelf, full, correctly labeled, and not frozen. If those conditions are met, Tier 1 has 0 failure points during the event itself. The failure is the person who did not buy them or bought them and used non-food grade containers that leached plasticizers into the water, or stored them in the garage where they freeze every February and eventually crack. None of those failure modes are technical. They are all procedural. The maintenance protocol for Tier 1. Calendar a rotation date every 6 months. On that date, drain the containers into your garden or use the water for any non-consumption purpose, washing the car, watering plants, cleaning. Rinse the containers with a dilute bleach solution. 1 tablespoon of bleach per gallon of water. Swirl to coat all interior surfaces. Drain. Let air dry for 30 minutes. Refill from the tap. Retreat with 8 drops of bleach per gallon. Label with the new fill date. Elapsed time, under an hour for 4 7-gallon containers. If you cannot commit to 1 hour every 6 months to maintain your Tier 1 water reserve, you do not have a Tier 1 water reserve. You have containers in your garage that you used to think of as your water reserve. Tier 2, the 30-day operational layer. This tier cannot be solved with storage alone. 700 gallons of water weighs approximately 5,800 pounds and occupies roughly 94 cubic feet of space, about the volume of a small bathroom. Even if you have the space, managing a static reserve that large without contamination or degradation requires real infrastructure. Tier 2 is built from 3 components operating in combination: a practical treated water reserve covering the first 2 weeks, a reliable processing capability for converting uncertain water to safe water, and an identified source for the raw input that the processing capability will treat. The treated water reserve in Tier 2 is sized for 2 weeks, not 30 days. 2 weeks gives you sufficient buffer to handle intermittent source water access, equipment maintenance downtime, and the reduced consumption rate of the first few days when the household is calibrating to the new baseline. 2 weeks at 700 gallons per month is 350 gallons. A 55-gallon blue HDPE drum costs $25 to $40 new, requires a hand pump for transfer at $12 to $20, and can be filled from a garden hose. 6 drums holds 330 gallons, covering the 2-week buffer with a small margin. Arrange them against a basement or garage wall where floor loading is adequate. 6 full drums weigh approximately 2,700 pounds. Confirm your floor can handle the concentrated load before filling. A note on rotation that most guides omit: stored water in sealed drums does not need to be replaced every 6 months if the drums are properly sealed and the water was clean when stored. The primary degradation mechanism for stored water is biological, microorganism growth, which requires an organic nutrient source and is suppressed by residual chlorine. Properly chlorinated tap water in a sealed food-grade container will remain safe for 1 to 5 years, depending on storage conditions. Test with a pool chlorine test strip before consuming if stored beyond 12 months. If chlorine reads 0, retreat before use. The container, not the water, is typically the limiting factor. HDPE degrades in UV exposure, which is why you store drums away from direct sunlight. A drum stored in a cool, dark space is a multi-year investment, not an annual rotation project. This matters for planning because the labor cost of maintaining a 6-drum Tier 2 reserve is much lower than most people assume. Processing capability. You need the ability to make uncertain water safe at volume and speed, continuously, without grid power. A gravity-fed ceramic or hollow fiber filter rated for at minimum 1,000 gallons, tested flow rate, not the spec sheet number from episode 2, handles drinking and cooking water. For larger sanitation volumes, chemical treatment is more practical than filtration. Calcium hypochlorite pool shock at 68 to 78% concentration, stored dry, is significantly more stable than liquid bleach. 3 to 5 years of shelf life, properly stored, versus 6 to 12 months for liquid bleach, and far cheaper per gallon treated. 1 pound of calcium hypochlorite treats roughly 10,000 gallons of water. A 5-pound container costs $20 to $30 and covers your chemical treatment needs for an extended period. The math on that cost per gallon treated makes it one of the highest value preparedness purchases on the list. Source water identification. Before you need it, identify where the raw input for your processing system will come from. Rainwater collection is the lowest friction option for most households. a standard residential roof in an area with moderate annual rainfall, 30 to 40 inches per year, can collect 4,000 to 6,000 gallons annually from a 1,000 square foot catchment area. In practice, accounting for first flush contamination, evaporation losses, and seasonal distribution, figure on 50 to 60% of theoretical maximum as usable volume with a basic diverter system. A first flush diverter routes the first 10 to 20 gallons of rainfall, the fraction that washes bird droppings, dust, and accumulated organic material from the roof surface away from your collection tank, and then directs the cleaner subsequent rainfall into storage. Diverter cost, $20 to $50. Collection container, a food-grade intermediate bulk container, typically 275 gallons, runs $60 to $120 used, or $200 to $300 new. Total Tier 2 system cost, $500 to $700 for a well-configured setup. Complexity rating, 3 out of 5. Tier 2 requires you to rotate stored water on a documented schedule, monitor filter performance using the baseline measurement method from Episode 2, maintain your chemical treatment stock, and test your collection system before you need it. A weekend of deliberate practice, actually filling, draining, treating, and measuring, is worth more than any amount of reading. The system needs to be exercised before the event, not during it. The critical limitation of Tiers 1 and 2 is that both have clocks running. The stored water degrades, the filter saturates, the bleach loses potency, the containers eventually crack. Everything in these tiers has a lifespan and a depletion rate. The system is a managed inventory, not a self-sustaining infrastructure. In IT terms, Tiers 1 and 2 are battery backup and a generator with a finite fuel supply. They buy time. They do not eliminate the dependency on external inputs. Tier 3, the indefinite layer. The only tier where the operational clock is not running. The only tier where the input does not deplete. There are two primary implementations, and which is appropriate for your situation depends on geology, geography, climate, budget, and how much infrastructure you want to manage long-term. Implementation A, a drilled well with a hand pump or a solar-powered deep well pump and a storage system. A drilled well reaches an underground aquifer with its own natural multi-stage filtration through rock and soil layers. Water quality is typically far superior to surface water and most collected rainwater. A hand pump designed for deep wells, not a shallow well suction pump, which only works to about 25 feet, operates without electricity, requires minimal maintenance, and has a service life measured in decades if properly installed. The hand pump eliminates the electrical dependency entirely, which means it operates independently of the energy system. A solar-powered submersible pump adds convenience and volume capacity, but introduces an electrical dependency that links your water system directly to your energy system, which is the transition we cover next episode. Well drilling cost varies by geology and depth. Budget $5,000 to $15,000 for most continental United States locations. A quality hand pump, $800 to $2,000. Total, $6,000 to $17,000, depending on depth and configuration. Complexity, 4 out of 5. You are managing a mechanical system with pump components, seals, and aquifer water quality that requires periodic testing to verify ongoing safety and basic pump maintenance to prevent the single annual failure that would take the system offline. Implementation B, a combined rainwater harvesting system with multi-stage treatment. A properly sized catchment, roof area calculated against your climate's rainfall distribution by month, not annual average, feeds into one or more food-grade cisterns with overflow management. The treatment train moves from coarse to fine. A sediment pre-filter removes particulates before they clog your primary filter. An activated carbon block filter removes organic compounds and improves taste and odor. A UV sterilization chamber kills pathogens that physical filtration does not remove, with calcium hypochlorite backup for periods when UV power is unavailable. This system operates semi-autonomously once built. The UV sterilizer is the critical dependency. It requires electricity, which again is the upstream dependency. System cost, fully built, $1,500 to $4,000, depending on cistern volume and treatment component quality. Complexity, 3 to 4 out of 5. Simpler mechanically than a well, but requiring more active management. Filter replacement on a documented schedule. UV bulb replacement annually. First flush diverter cleaning after significant rainfall events. Cistern inspection for algae or sediment accumulation semi-annually. The pattern across all 3 tiers is the same pattern you see in any well-designed infrastructure stack. Tier 1 is simple, cheap, and fast. Its purpose is not to solve the problem, it is to prevent immediate catastrophic failure while you have time to activate the next level. Tier 2 is moderately complex and operationally demanding. Its purpose is to extend your window from days to months. Tier 3 is expensive, infrastructure-intensive, and the most demanding to maintain. Its purpose is to eliminate the depletion clock by connecting to a renewable input. Most households with any preparedness orientation have some version of Tier 1. Very few have a functional Tier 2. Almost none have Tier 3 unless they live rurally and have a well as a default property feature. If you are suburban or urban, Tier 3 may not be achievable without significant investment and regulatory consideration. Some states restrict rainwater harvesting, though most have substantially relaxed those restrictions in the last decade. Check your local regulations before building collection infrastructure. In most jurisdictions, residential rainwater harvesting for household use is now either unrestricted or requires only a simple permit. Now the observation that ties this episode to the next. Look back across every Tier 2 and Tier 3 solution in this framework. The gravity filter is power independent in operation. Everything else is not. The UV sterilizer requires continuous power. The submersible pump requires power. The transfer pump for your drum reserve requires power. Boiling water, the lowest technology backup for every purification step, requires fuel. Even some gravity filter systems include a UV pre-treatment stage with a power dependency. Your water system does not stand alone. It sits on top of an energy substrate, and that substrate has its own tiers, its own failure modes, and its own audit requirement. This is what engineers call an upstream dependency. Energy is upstream of water in the dependency stack. You can build a perfectly specified Tier 2 water system with excellent filtration and a generous chemical treatment reserve, and it fails completely if the energy input is interrupted and you have no fallback. You solved the water problem at the hardware level and left the upstream problem unaddressed. The system has a single point of failure you did not model. That is the framing for Episode 4. We are going to run the same audit on energy that we ran on water today. Calculate the actual demand, not theoretical, not spec sheet, actual measured consumption for every tier of water solution, every heating solution, every communication and information system, and every medical device dependency in a typical household. Then build the same 3-tier architecture, minimum viable at around 72 hours, operational standard at 30 days, and continuous operation. Same cost scoring, same complexity rating, same dependency analysis going one level further upstream. Here is your assignment before that episode. Apply today's calculation to your own household. Get 4 numbers. First, your family size and realistic daily water consumption per person for each of the 4 categories. Not my numbers, your household's actual patterns. You know whether your family runs high or low relative to average. Second, your current storage in gallons of treated ready-to-use water. Third, how many days that storage covers at the full 4-category calculation, not the WHO minimum, the real functional survival number. Fourth, the gap in days between your current storage and 30 days at that rate. While you are doing that calculation, also do this. Locate your water heater's drain valve. Know where it is. Know what you need to open it. Most require a garden hose attachment and a flathead screwdriver. Practice opening it once with a bucket under it to confirm the valve is not seized. A seized valve on a water heater that has sat untouched for years is a common failure. The 40 to 80 gallons in that tank is the most valuable immediate water reserve in your house, but only if you can actually access it when the municipal supply fails. If the valve will not open under normal conditions, it will definitely not open under stress. A tube of plumber's grease and 5 minutes of maintenance converts a theoretical reserve into a real one. The gap is your engineering problem statement. You cannot solve a problem you have not defined. 700 gallons is the rough target for a family of 4, but the right number for your household is your household's actual calculation. Some run higher, a family member with a medical condition requiring significant water use, a hot climate where drinking requirements are elevated, a household that cannot tolerate the hygiene reduction implied by my minimum estimates. Some run lower, a 2-person household, low activity levels, a composting toilet that eliminates the sanitation category entirely. Run your numbers, post them in the comments. Your family size, your current storage in gallons, and how many days of full 4-category coverage that represents. Not the FEMA number, the real number. If the math gives you less than 72 hours of genuine multi-category coverage, you are not in the minority. You are in the majority. And the $40 fix that takes 1 afternoon is waiting at the hardware store. The 700-gallon number is not meant to paralyze. It is meant to orient. Every number in this calculation has a solution, and that solution starts at $40 and 1 afternoon. The direction matters more than the destination. Move from 0 coverage to Tier 1. Then extend toward Tier 2, on a timeline that reflects your actual risk assessment and your actual budget, not someone else's urgency schedule and not the survival industry's interest in selling you everything at once. Build the floor first, then build up from it. Energy is next. Every solution we built today runs on it.